Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So, tomorrow, Wednesday, March 9th, is election day here in Korea, and on election day in Korea, we actually have it as an official holiday. Think about that, so that people actually are able to go out to vote. And when I first came to Korea, I was shocked. I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. Why can't we have that in the United States? So, that might be something that you may want to consider in the United States, especially when Korea still has some non-democratic tendencies, and yet they have the right to a holiday when they vote. Access to voting may be a lot more fair here in Korea, but the voting itself has not always been. And I wanted to go over today a concept that I want to just make up called dictator fatigue. What happens when a society is finally so fed up with living under dictatorship? What does it prompt society to do, and what does it prompt particular people, even within the dictator's own inner circle, to do? Because with all of the chaos that is being caused by President Vladimir Putin, who, you guys, was also quote-unquote democratically elected, I think we need to remind ourselves what happened to a particular South Korean president when his own head of the intelligence service, the Korean CIA, decided to off his own boss, and they were like longtime friends. So if you want to watch a movie to get yourself familiar with this particular part of Korean history that is so overlooked, I guess we also try to keep it quiet that, the head of the Korean CIA actually killed the president of South Korea in 1979. Not something that we lead with usually when we're doing kind of like our Korea promotional events. However, I think it is extremely fascinating to talk about and reflect upon, because it really does show these fiery two sides of Korea that still live with us today. This penchant for authoritarianism and sort of a dictatorship way of living, and then this really active passion for equality, justice, and fixing the system, all came to a head on October 26, 1979, at a dinner party. So let's start with the end and then work our way to how we got there. So October 26, 1979, Kim Jae-gyu, he was the head of the Korean CIA. He actually shot to death President Park Chung-hee. Now, there are different theories as to what led him to do it. Was it spontaneous passion in the moment? Was it planned thoughtfully well in advance? Or even was the American CIA also involved in some sort of regime change operation? Apparently, they say that there's no absolute conclusive evidence, because they actually hanged Kim Jae-gyu a few months after all of this happened, after his trial and all of his co-conspirators. But we do have what he did say, and he said he did it for the sake of democracy. He said he did it to save the nation from a corrupt dictator that was going to be dictator for life. So usually when you hear the name Park Chung-hee, and especially in the more pro-Korea type of environment where we're trying to put a nice sheen on things, we'll go up to a point where saying like, oh, he was a controversial leader because he was a dictator, but he ushered in the transformation of the Korean economy. And personally, I think that not just one man transforms the Korean economy. I think it actually takes all of the workers, the business owners, the people in civil society. I mean, why does Park Chung-hee get all the credit for transforming Korea? You know, everybody else in the country likes to take credit for Korea being able to rise from the ashes and then become a modern country. Why are we all giving the credit just to him? Everybody who worked their butt off during those years should take the credit. So let's kind of be clear that that is also part of the dictator's playbook, is to kind of take the credit for everything. But how did a trusted member of Park Chung-hee's inner circle, the head of the Korean intelligence agency, which essentially the way that Park Chung-hee was running the country, that was the almost like number 2 spot in the country, because he used all of that espionage to maintain power, to get rid of his enemies, quite literally. Former President Kim Dae-jung, yeah, he was a democracy activist. He was almost killed off of a submarine through some sort of Korean CIA plot until the Americans intervened and just kind of actually literally flew in with like some military aircraft to stop it, but he was about to be thrown over a submarine that, you know, went up to the surface. Oh my god. But how did we get here? Because how was this trusted person the one that actually turned on his friend, the president, and seemingly become disloyal? Now, if we rewind the clock, we have to go back to the presidential election of 1960. This is the time period where Park Chung-hee was able to then become a dictator. He did not run for president. Park Chung-hee did not run for president in 1960. Seungman Rhee was running for re-election. He had been essentially kind of like appointed to be the president of South Korea, probably with a lot of intervention through the OSS, which was like the precursor of the CIA right after World War II. And, you know, this guy, Seungman Rhee, like, he went to Princeton, I believe, and he spoke English. So, you know, he was gonna be able to maintain good relations with the United States. However, his government became extremely corrupt. He became very dictatorial. And in the 1960 election, which happened in March, he was accused of rigging the votes. And even before the election, his 2 opponents died. One of them, he accused of being a communist, so then he jailed and then he actually executed. Imagine that. Way to thin the herd. The second one had some sort of stomach ailment or some kind of like medical emergency that he then went to the United States for treatment. And over there, he sort of had like this mysterious heart attack. And so both of his opponents gone. And then at that time, the vice president actually was under a separate election. So, you know, you didn't run under the pair. You actually had 2 separate elections, although Seungman Rhee wanted his protege to win. And then when the votes came back, it looked obviously so rigged. So that happened in March of 1960. The country went crazy. It went into revolts in April. So that was called the April 19th Revolution. And that actually led to Seungman Rhee resigning and then going to Hawaii for exile. not a bad deal if you ask me. Now, there was an interim president or another presidential election, and somebody did get elected, but he wasn't able to really hold on to power. The country was all in turmoil, and who do we have here but Park Chung-hee, who was part of the military, and his compatriots, and they were all part of an activist group to try to bring in democracy, because apparently they did not want to have another dictatorship. They didn't want to have all of this corruption. And so Kim Jae-gyu, the guy who eventually, killed Park Chung-hee, was part of that whole movement, and he really wanted democracy. So that's why somebody could, quote unquote, turn. He never really turned, according to this school of thought. If you believe that his ideology was to save democracy in Korea, he never really turned or became disloyal, because he was loyal to democracy first, but he was such a good follower at doing his job. So from 1961, when Park Chung-hee seized control and then became the president of South Korea through some military coup d'etat, then until 1979, until his death of Park Chung-hee, he was loyal because he thought that Park Chung-hee was on the side of democracy too. But it turns out that he saw his friend more and more and more and more devolve into a dictator, and actually officially seal that in the early 1970s. So apparently in 1971, Park Chung-hee had promised that that would be his last term in office. But he changed the constitution, and that's called the controversial Yushin Constitution in Korea, where it basically changed the constitution to make him dictator for life. But, totally sneaky. If you actually look through the constitution and see how it was structured, it didn't say I'm going to be dictator for life. He essentially manipulated it so that nobody else could win or run against him, and that he was able to always appoint the majority in the legislature. So, usually sort of like the legislature is supposed to counteract and balance the power of the president, but he was able to rig the constitution so that everybody looks at it okay, he's setting himself up to be a dictator for life, which he was doing. So he kept going until that fateful night in 1979. So I don't want to spoil it for you, because the movie is largely based on history. They changed a few of the names of the characters. So if you look for Kim Jae-gyu, you might be confused, why is Lee Byung-hun not Kim Jae-gyu and he uses a different character name? It's because they were trying to avoid any trouble. And there was some artistic license taken with the story, but in general, the sentiment and the timeline and the perspective of Kim Jae-gyu as somebody who was extremely morally conflicted in his role as being a torturer, punisher, and essentially killer as the head of the Korean CIA starts to go a bit mad, because I think he was trying to justify his actions by being patient that things would turn around eventually, because he was probably very realistic. You can't just build Rome in a day, and you can't just transform the Korean system into a fully well-functioning democracy overnight, especially when they were really focused on just trying to survive poverty, get the economy going, and then also deal with the North Korea threat. So apparently this wasn't the first attempt in October. In April of 1979, apparently there was hints of a like this was on his mind. He was about to do it then, but then he, I guess, was able to have a conversation with the president. Park Chung-hee just seems like he was a narcissistic psychopath, and he was able to kind of gaslight everybody. And so maybe that was probably the last like love bombing, or kind of like, oh hey, like let's work this out. He probably sort of worked it out in April, but then by October it was probably messed up all over again. And so during that time there was a dinner being organized, and it was like at one of the buildings that was part of the presidential compound. So it was supposed to be just a very intimate affair, but of course they actually had to call in the girls, and so there was some girls there too. And he, during dinner, went boom, 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 and essentially that was that. During his trial, he was asked to reenact the whole thing, so they actually set it all up again. And then so while he was like, in his prison garb, and they use ropes to kind of like restrain him, like little, actually like, those fabric or straw ropes. And so he was supposed to reenact what he did, and so that was part of the trial. But what we saw here was that I believe the person kind of overseeing the trial became the next dictator, Chun Doo-hwan, and he accused Kim Jae-gyu of basically doing this so that he could grab power. He accused him of a coup d'etat, so then he got rid of him. He was like, no, I did it for democracy. I did it to save the country, and to, he said, literally shoot at the heart of the Yushin Constitution. So he felt really betrayed by that constitution, and also his friend who was supposed to, years ago, 18 years ago, be part of this revolution to bring democracy to South Korea. So we won't go into Chun Doo-hwan, who was a hot mess, but he was the guy that was able to usurp power for real, and that was the next coup d'etat. But during this time, during this trial, not only was Kim Jae-gyu sentenced and then hanged, everybody else got hanged who was involved in this. Even the driver in the safe house, the other people who were accomplices in that night. And actually, because, this is true, KCIA, don't stop, they tried to cover their tracks by like machine gunning after the boom boom and make it look like it might have been a North Korean invasion. That's why there was a lot of delay during that time. People were trying to figure out what the heck happened. Did this really happen? And so the initial reports, I believe, were saying like, oh, something happened. But they were just like, what? But apparently the evidence does show that for years, Kim Jae-gyu was trying to find a way to work with this dictator and bring about the reforms. If he wasn't going to be able to wait for Park Chung-hee to stop being a dictator, apparently he had asked for advice from other people, including a relative who was serving in the consulate in Japan, to find a different way to amend the Yushin Constitution so that it wouldn't be dictator for life. And then it seems as if his role as being the guy that always had to organize all of these hits on people started to weigh on Kim Jae-gyu's mind. There's one example of a democracy activist who became a journalist, and his name was Chang Jun-ha, and he had mysteriously died while hiking. Apparently, the story that was published was that he slipped and then he fell. But according to some records, it showed that Kim Jae-gyu actually had been in contact with opposition members, people who are in the pro-democracy camp. Like, he knew these people, and so that's why I'm saying he probably did not really have a change of heart. His heart was being really burdened by the way things were going under this dictator, and he was getting dictator fatigue. And he had even helped the family financially of the journalist that died in that mysterious hiking accident. So nobody does that unless you feel really guilty. And apparently, according to that journalist's son, Kim Jae-gyu actually went to him, and when they talked and said, like, look, it wasn't an accident. We were somehow involved. I'm very sorry. And so I think he was just getting fed up. And so dictator fatigue. That's all I can say. You know, like chronic fatigue syndrome, maybe there is dictator fatigue syndrome. No matter how loyal you are, no matter how much benefit you might receive, how much you're being blackmailed, there will be some people within your own government who are fatigued by the dictator and do not see a future after you see like what's really behind the curtain. And so what we're looking at right now with Putin, I think you're beginning to see some dictator fatigue in even the upper ranks and echelons, because it's like, you know, you catch some of these people with their like expressions being like, what the, you know? What I'm most curious about is, do Russian people not get jealous? And I don't want to like overly generalize, but I guess another way to maybe ask this question genuinely, is there some sort of strong civics or kind of family or cultural education in Russia to say, do not get jealous, do not get jealous? Because if this were Korea, the way that the oligarchs are just stealing money and sending it out of the country, Korean people would not stand for that. They, like, even though I said, like, okay, we've been living with dictators, even though in this, you know, modern 21st century, we still have, like, these dictatorial tendencies, there is a line that gets activated in Koreans, and a lot of it is toxic jealousy. So they will not stand for a leader, and that's what happened to President Park Geun-hye, Park Chung-hee's daughter. So Park Geun-hye, yes, she did all these things that violated the Constitution, but what really got the Korean public really mad was what I think is jealousy that her best friend was taking advantage of the position and self-enriching herself. Now, we're talking about a friend who shook down a corporation so that she could pay for her daughter's horse and get her into college and maybe get up to the tune of $70 million, maybe $100 million. We don't know the full extent of the amount of money, but I would venture a bet that it has no way in comparison to the amount of money that the oligarchs are taking and have taken out of the country. Now, that is something that also will piss Korean people off to the moon. Not only would you steal the money, but you would take it out of the country. People in Korea see that as, and rightfully so, that's their money. Why are you taking our tax dollars and then not only stealing it, but now taking it out of the country, depositing it into other economies, buying other real estate? Korean people would be so mad about that. Even a foreign company coming to Korea, making a profit, and then trying to distribute the dividends out, Korean people think that is theft. Even that people here have a problem with. They just see that as like, wow, you're taking advantage of our country. So at least in that sense, you know, the Korean people will act upon something like that. But where is that in Russia? I don't see that. I don't feel that in the people. Where is this rage over all of this being taken away from you when it's your tax dollars and then you're living so low while all of these oligarchs are living so high? Apparently, even with the Sochi Winter Olympics, in order to pay that $50 billion bill, Vladimir Putin had gutted the country's pension system, so now people's like retirement is at stake or has been reduced over in Russia. So where is this kind of red line for them? Is it a mentality that because it was under communism, there was never any kind of conception of like that was ours that somebody else is taking to begin with? I wonder if you I doubt this is reaching Russia, but if you have any kind of like insight into the whole, Russian culture, please comment below. Because I think if we want some change in Russia and in the Ukraine conflict, we really have to find a way for the Russian civil society to have a little bit more power. And I think the way that it's so repressive, where people are just going to jail for just even opening their mouths, does put a dent in things, but it does still show how brave people are for still resisting underneath, I'll call it terrorism, by your own government. So is there going to be dictator fatigue? I think, yes, there is already dictator fatigue. So now what are we going to do about it, or what are they going to do about it even within the country? In South Korea, when we get to a certain point of dictator fatigue, things happen. So I don't know exactly what would happen, but I do think that it is worth thinking about and supporting. All right, guys, so that movie was The Man Standing Next, and Lee Byung-hun plays Kim Jae-gyu. He does an amazing job, and this was South Korea's entry that year to the foreign film category of the Academy Awards, and absolutely well done piece of like cinematic masterpiece. It is some scary times, but we have been here before. Many countries have been here before. We've all kind of gone through this. So I just want people in Russia to know that they're not alone, and that dictator fatigue, I think, is a real thing that everybody has to take care of one way or the other eventually. All right, guys, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.